Have you ever wondered what happens in the quietest hours of the night in a hospital? When the corridors are empty, and even the faint hum of machines seems to hold its breath. For some, it's just the stillness of a long shift. But for others, it's the moment the hospital's past comes alive in ways they can never forget. I've worked in hospitals for years, and the late-night shifts are something you either get used to or dread. At first, I thought the ghost stories told by my colleagues were just a way to pass time. That was until I had my own encounter, one that made me question everything I thought I knew about life and death. This is my story, and the chilling tales shared by my co-workers that still send shivers down my spine. Story 1. The patient in room 308. It started during one of my first night shifts as a nurse. I was doing rounds, checking patient charts and adjusting IVs. Everything was quiet, almost eerily so. The only sound was the squeak of my shoes on the polished floor. When I got to room 308, I instinctively knocked before entering, even though I knew the room was unoccupied. As I opened the door, a wave of cold air hit me. The bed was perfectly made, the room spotless, just as it should have been. But then I noticed something odd. The chair next to the bed was pulled out, as though someone had been sitting there recently. I dismissed it as housekeeping forgetting to push it back in, but as I turned to leave, I heard it. A soft, raspy voice. "Help me!" I froze, my heart racing. Turning slowly, I saw nothing but the empty bed and the chair. I called out, "Hello? Is anyone there?" No answer. When I reported it to the charge nurse, she gave me a knowing look. "Room 308 used to belong to an elderly patient. She'd always call for help late at night, even when no one was there. Some say she's still calling, even now." Story 2. The Shadow in the Stairwell. A few months later, I swapped stories with Sarah, a respiratory therapist who had been working at the hospital for over a decade. She told me about the south stairwell, a place staff avoided whenever they could. Sarah's story began on a stormy night. She had finished a procedure and decided to take the stairs down to the break room. She was halfway down when she felt it. A presence. "At first I thought it was just my imagination," she said. "But then I saw the shadow." It wasn't a shadow cast by someone behind her, nor one that moved naturally. It was shaped like a person, but darker than the dimly lit stairwell itself. "It stood at the bottom of the stairs, just watching me," Sarah continued, her voice trembling at the memory. "I couldn't see its face, but I could feel it staring. And then it started to climb up toward me, one slow step at a time." She ran back up the stairs, not stopping until she was safely in a brightly lit hallway. Since then, she's always taken the elevator. Story 3. The Child in the ICU. One story that still haunts me was told by Linda, a pediatric nurse. She was working in the ICU one night, where every room was filled except for one at the end of the hall. The empty room had a small rocking chair in the corner, a relic from when the ICU had been used for maternity cases. Linda had always thought it was a sweet touch, though a bit out of place in its current setting. That night, as she was charting at the nurse's station, she glanced down the hallway. Her heart stopped when she saw the rocking chair moving back and forth on its own. At first, she thought it might be a draft, but there were no windows in that room, and the air conditioning was off. Linda walked cautiously toward the room, her every step heavier than the last. When she reached the doorway, she saw him, a small boy, no older than 6, sitting in the chair. He was pale, almost translucent, with large, sad eyes that seemed to pierce right through her. "Are you lost?" Linda asked, her voice barely above a whisper. The boy didn't respond. Instead, he pointed toward one of the occupied rooms. Linda turned to follow his gesture, but when she looked back, the boy was gone. Later, she learned that the patient in the room the boy had pointed to had passed away shortly after her encounter. Story 4. The Woman in White. This last story is my own, and it's the one that still gives me nightmares. It was around 2 a.m. on a quiet Tuesday night. I was walking through the older wing of the hospital, which had been mostly shut down for renovations. It was dimly lit, with only emergency lights casting long shadows across the empty corridors. As I passed one of the old patient rooms, I caught a glimpse of movement out of the corner of my eye. There, standing in the middle of the room, was a woman in a white hospital gown. Her back was to me, her long hair matted and unkempt. "Ma'am?" I called out, stepping closer. "You're not supposed to be here." She didn't respond. Instead, she began to hum a low, haunting tune that sent chills racing down my spine. When I stepped into the room, she turned to face me. Her eyes were sunken, her skin pale as death. And then she smiled. a chilling, unnatural smile that froze me in place. Before I could react, she vanished, leaving only the faint sound of her humming lingering in the air. I reported the incident, but the security footage showed nothing unusual. To this day, I avoid that wing of the hospital whenever I can. Hospitals are places of healing, but they're also places of immense pain, loss, and death. It's no wonder that some spirits might linger, unable or unwilling to move on. The stories I've shared are just a few of the many whispered among hospital staff during quiet night shifts. Whether you believe in ghosts or not, there's no denying the eerie weight that hangs in the air in places like these. So, the next time you find yourself in a hospital late at night, listen closely. You might just hear the echoes of those who came before and who never truly left.